I mean,
Why you have to find the missing?
I hope some of this is review. Okay, so roots, squares, and cubes. Again, 50% of this you already know, hopefully. So let's talk squares first. Squares. Yes, squares are a shape. More specifically about a square, what's the specifics of a shape that's a square? Like what makes a square, Refugio?
90-degree right angles and all the sides are the same length.
Perfect, the sides are the same length. So if you're going to find the area of a square, what do?
You multiply one side by 4.
Area.
Length times width.
Length times width, but if they're the same number, what do?
Multiply by 2. Right.
You square it, right? 4 squared. 4 times 4 is 16. 5 times 5 is,
25.
right? So squares, the definition of a square, right, is a number. Now this is non-geometry definition, right? Squares. So in algebra, it's a number multiplied by itself. And we sometimes struggle with this concept of squares. I talked about this before we took our test. It's a 50-50 shot sometimes on whether or not you get 7 squared correct. Half the time you say 7 squared is 49, which is right. The other half of the time people see 7 squared and they put 14. Because they see the 7 and the 2. So squares. 1 squared is 1. 1 times 1 is 1. 2 squared. 2 times 2 is 4. 3 squared. 3 times 3 is 9. 4 squared is 16. 5 squared, 25. 6 squared, 7 squared, 8 squared, 9 squared, 10 squared, 11 squared, 121, 12 squared, 144. That's typically where we stop memorizing. You can keep going because it makes, all it does is make your life easier the more perfect squares you know. Is this kind of coming back?
Yes.
And then, yep, these are called perfect squares.
Oh yeah.
Right? These numbers right here are called perfect squares. And remember, you can undo a square, right? Do you remember what it's called if you're going to undo a square? It kind of looks like a division sign. It's called a radical.
That's right.
And if you're undoing a square, it's a square root. It's called a radical. And if it's undoing a square, one of these perfect squares, it's called a square root. So like the square root of 81 is what? 9. And how do you know the square root of 81 is 9? Yeah, because 9 times 9 equals 81. It's a perfect square. And remember, at the beginning of the year, we estimated. If I gave you the number 50, where does 50 fit in this list?
Between 49 and 64.
Between 49 and 64. So the square root of 50 is between 7
Squared and 8.
and 8. Is it closer to 7 or is it closer to 8?
7.
Because,
The square root of 7 is 49.
I mean, 50 is super duper close to 49. So it's really close to 7. I mean, is this kind of coming back to you?
Yes.
Right. So we're going to take it one little step further. And instead of a square is a number times itself, and I'm actually going to put in here, just for a little reminder to you, it tends to be area. Like if it's an area problem, you're working with squares.
So to find the area, you do base times width, right?
Right. And if it's a square, the base and the height are what?
Squared.
I mean, they're the same, right? Because it's a square. If it's a square and the bottom's 5, how tall is it?
25.
How tall is it?
5.
And 5 times 5 is, so it's squared, 5 squared. So we're going to take it a little step further and we're going to talk cubes. And a cube is a number multiplied by itself, then multiplied by itself again. I can hear that music. So
Again.
take them out
Like,
and focus.
again.
So it's multiplied by itself, then multiplied by itself again. Ladies and gentlemen, it looks like this. It's an exponent of 3
Okay, it's a three-dimensional shape.
because it's a 3-dimensional shape. It has a length, it has a width, and it has a height. So this is called volume. No, you're not. You're missing out on stuff because you're hungry. Okay, so 1 cubed, 1 times 1 times 1 is 1. Two cubed. 2 times 2 times 2.
8.
3 cubed. 3 times 3 times 3. 27. 4 cubed. 4 times 4 times 4. 5 cubed. And this is typically where we stop memorizing. If it's something else, then we guess and check, or we use our calculator to figure it out. But if you can memorize these 5 cubes, you're good to go. Let's do 6 just because we have a little bit of room. What's 6 cubed? 6 times 6 times 6. I'm getting 2 different answers. It's 216.
216. I told you guys. You guys are gonna pay attention one of these days.
So, these are cubes. To undo a cube, we again use a radical. But here's my problem. Like 64 and 64 are in both problems. So how do I differentiate if I'm taking the square root or the cube root? So here's how you do it. If you're undoing a cube, it's a cube root. And here's the difference. There's a little tiny baby 3 in front. And that tells me that it's not the square root of 64. If there's nothing there, that means the square root of 64. What times what equals 64? 8. But since there's a cube in front of it, it tells me what times what times what. I want 3 number, right? I want to do it 3 times. This is a cube root. It's not a square root. That's a square root. This is a cube root. The cube root of 64 is 4. Why is it 4?
Yes. Because 4 times 4 times 4 equals 64. That's all.
Yes.
So you say like that little baby 3, right?
Uh-huh.
It can be like any number, like a 7. Like,
Yeah, it could be, and it tells you then what something 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It needs that number 7 times. So that's a good question, Rafigu. Everybody grab your calculator. And here's how you get to the cube root. Now it's different on different calculators, right?
Yeah.
But see right here, let me zoom in for you.
Second.
See how there's a square root with an x in front of it right here?
Yeah.
And then down below it is just the regular square root? Okay. So if I type second, because they're in green, right? X squared, just the regular square root, and 64, I get 8. Agree? The square root of 64 is 8. Now let's try the other one. So if you press second and then this other square root sign, see how it says up there? ANS, answer. I'm going to arrow over to it. Right? I'm going to delete it. Let's do 3 first. Do the number 3. Sorry. I'm going to put 3 up there. And let's delete the answer. See, now I have that 3 there. And I'm going to do 64. And you get 4. Like Refugio said, you could put any number in there. Let's do second x squared, put in 8. Hold on. And do 256. Do you know what that means? What does that mean? 8 is on the outside and 256 is on the inside, and you get an answer of 2. Maddie, what does it mean? 2 to the power of 8 is 256. Just like 4 to the power of 3 is 64. And 8 squared, even though there's no 2, is 64. All right, we'll glue in this paper in a minute, but let's not take the time to do that right now. Let's just start. But we'll glue it on the next page in a minute, okay? Okay. Find the positive value of x that makes each equation true. Check your solution. So, x squared equals 169. Explain the first step in solving this equation. So we have x squared equals 169. What do we have to do to figure out x? What's it called? What's it called? Refugio? Radical. And since it's a square, what's it called? Square root. We're going to do the square root of 169. And for the most part, we should have this memorized. It's off our list, but it's one more. So what do we get?
13.
The square root of 169 is 13.
Can we just divide 169 divided by 2?
No.
Oh, never mind. That'd be that quick.
You cannot divide by 2 because it's square rooting it. And let's check it. 13 squared equals 169, so we're good. All right, number 2, a square-shaped park has an area of 324 yards. What are the dimensions of the park? Write and solve an equation. How do you find square-shaped area? What do you do to find the area of a square? Base times height, and since it's a square, what base and height are the what? They're the same number. So what's the formula? Side squared. Side times side. Base times height. And since it's a square, it's the same number. It's side squared, or x squared, or b squared, right? Anything.
R squared.
Perfect. And what is the area? What's the area? It tells us 324. And remember, guys, look, we wrote this down. Where is it? Squares are area. So if it talks about area, you need to have it squared. All right, you can use a calculator, but let's pretend you don't have a calculator, or you don't have one of these yellow calculators at home. Right?
Oh, he just put the phone.
Well, I mean, even you could just 14 times 14, is it 324?
No.
15 times 15, is it 324?
No.
16 times 16, is it 324?
No. Try 18 times 18.
17 times 17, is it 324?
No.
18 times 18, is it 324?
We got another winner.
So, I mean, you don't have to have a fancy calculator to do this, right?
No. But that takes too much time.
Well, I get it, but you also can't say, I don't have a calculator.
You can't come in the school and say that.
The square root of 324 is 18. And I get that because I'm undoing, right? I'm unsquaring it. I know my answer and I want to figure out what the perfect square is. Down here, what are you going to do? It's a squared. So what's the opposite?
Radical.
Radical, and what kind of radical? A square root or a cube root?
Square.
It's a square root. So what's the square root of 625? What, BB? 25. Can you check it to make sure you were right? What would you do to make sure you were right? 25 times 25. Focus, please. We're on number 3. Number 4, a cube has a volume of 27 inches cubed. Which one did we write volume next to? Squares or cubes?
Cube.
Yeah, volume is cubes. So, something cubed equals what? 27. No. How do you undo a cubing?
Radical volume.
You do radical. What kind of radical? A square root or a cube root?
Cube root.
So the cube root of 27 is 3. And how would you check it?
3 times 3 times 3 times 3.
Too many.
Oh. 3 times 3 times 3 times 3.
Correct.
There.
All right, number 5. What is the positive value that makes x squared equal 64? Explain. What is the value of x that makes the following equation true? X squared equals 64. What squared equals 64? Emily? 8. Why? Good. What is the positive value of x that makes the following equation true? X to the third equals 64. X to the third equals 64. And explain. Kalia? Ooh. Find the positive value of x that makes the equation true.
It's negative.
X squared equals 256 to the negative 1. All right, let's pretend that negative 1 isn't there, correct? What if it was just x squared equals 256? How do you get 256? Refugio, what'd you get?
Oh, I got 16.
People agree?
Yes.
Great.
16 to the negative.
All right, so let's think this through. Everybody, are you ready? 16 squared equals 256, right?
Yeah.
And how do we know?
Because I checked it.
Because 16 times 16 equals 256, right? But that's not what I wanted. I wanted 256 to the negative first power. Can you tell me what a negative exponent means? What does a negative exponent mean? Negative exponent. Eduardo, what does negative exponent mean? It means you take the number and you put it in the denominator. Correct?
And you put a 1 over it.
And you put a 1 over it, right?
Yeah.
So what do you think I'm going to do to this 16?
Do the same exact thing, just at the bottom, and it's a 16.
Correct.
Oh, I got it right.
Because 1/16 squared equals, what's 1 times 1?
Oh, 1.
1 squared is 1. And what's 16 squared?
256.
256. So let's try this one. Find the positive value of x that makes x to the third equal 343 to the negative 1. So what that means is my 343 is going to be in the denominator. What times what times what? It's a cube equals 343. Kalia, what'd you get? 7. So the answer is 1/7. Because 1/7 to the third power, what's 1 times 1 times 1? What's 7 times 7 times 7?
343.
Right? Yes.
Okay, so I put the little bar thing, like the radical,
Uh-huh.
and I put 343, and then I saw what it was, and it says 7, then like that little bar thing.
You forgot to put the 3 in front of it.
Oh.
You forgot to make it a cube root. You did the square root of 343.
Okay.
Right? And this is what Refugio got. He did the square root of 343 and got this answer.
Yeah, that's it.
He forgot to put that 3 up there. So you have to be really aware. That's why sometimes I don't like using a calculator. I like doing this guess and check method because it takes that error out for us. All right, last one. Is this a solution? So all I'm going to do is put this number into this problem. 6 squared minus 4 equals
5x.
5 times 6. Yeah. Is 6 the answer? Does 6 work for x? I don't know. Let's test it. Instead of x, I'm putting the number 6. What's 6 squared?
36.
Minus 4.
32.
Did it work? No. Why didn't it work?
32 is not 30.
Yeah, 32 doesn't equal 30. You have to solve both sides, right? 6 squared minus 4 is 32.
I got confused because you put a 0, so like I thought.
Got it.